Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. My name is Emma Mamo and I am Head of Workplace Wellbeing at Mind, the mental health charity. Mind provides advice and support to empower anyone experiencing a mental health problem. We also campaign to improve services, raise awareness and promote understanding of mental health. Mind is leading a major new project called the Blue Light Programme, which is dedicated to helping support the mental health of emergency service personnel working across England. So staff and volunteers working within the police service, the fire and rescue service, ambulance, and then also the search and rescue service. The programme will focus on raising awareness and tackling stigma within the services. It will also provide training to line managers and team leaders so they're better able to support staff. And it's also be providing tools and information to help personnel better support their mental health and build their resilience to take on these challenging roles. And we'll also be providing information and support to all who need it. This webinar and others in the series have been made specifically for emergency service personnel. Joining us to share their experiences of mental health whilst working for the police service are Edward Simpson, who is a Sergeant for North Yorkshire Police, and then Dave Stringer, who is Chief Superintendent based within the Community Engagement Team at Metropolitan Police Service, located in London. In this webinar, we will talk about what is mental well-being and what affects our mental well-being, and then how to build resilience and stay mentally well, and then sharing tips on managing your mental well-being at work, and then of course hearing from Dave and Ed about their experiences and what they've learned from that in terms of managing their mental health at work and supporting colleagues. So what affects our mental well-being? So our mental well-being describes our mental state, how we're feeling and how well we can cope with day-to-day life. Our mental well-being can change from day to day, month to month or year to year. It exists on a spectrum and we move up and down it from good to poor for any number of reasons. If you have good mental well-being or good mental health, you are usually able to feel relatively confident in yourself and judge yourself on realistic and reasonable standards. You can feel and express a range of emotions and you feel engaged with the world around you, and you can build and maintain positive relationships and contribute to your community. And it also means you can live and work productively. And also the fact that you can kind of cope with the stresses of daily life, including managing times of change or uncertainty. In terms of poor mental health, we all have times when we have low mental well-being. We can feel sad or stressed or find it difficult to cope. These can be due to life events such as bereavement or relationship breakdown or just any kind of change in your circumstances. But sometimes there is no obvious reason why we experience poor mental health. It can just happen, and it happens to anyone. It's indiscriminate. However, we do know there are some common factors or common triggers that can lead to poor mental health. So if you have a long-term physical health condition you're living with, that can also have an impact on your mental health. As we mentioned before, changes in your circumstances, so relationship breakdown, financial issues, poor living conditions, and then also being out of work can have a huge impact on your mental health. And linked to that is this idea around social isolation or loneliness. And then also caring for a family member or a friend who might be going for a difficult period, or again managing their own physical health conditions and so on. That role of being a carer can really take a toll on your mental health as well. And then experiencing significant trauma as an adult, so being involved or witnessing a serious incident or being a victim of a violent crime. Now, Mind, as part of the Blue Light Programme, has done a bit of research with emergency service personnel. We surveyed 3,500 people working within these services to find out, how they experience mental health problems. And we found that within the police, 91% of police personnel that we surveyed had experienced stress, low mood, or poor mental health at work. So that seems to suggest that the challenging nature of the profession means that you are more likely to be exposed to traumatic incidents and challenging working conditions. But from the research, we also found that people are very reluctant to let that impact on the ability to do their job. So they're very reluctant to take time off, maybe because they're fearful of the impact, or worried about the impact it will have on colleagues. But this comes at then a large personal cost, so they hold it together at work, but then that can impact on their relationships and their physical health, so quite a cause for concern. So in terms of the links between well-being and mental health problems, if you experience low levels of mental well-being over a long period of time, you are more likely to develop a mental health problem. If you're already living with a mental health problem such as depression or anxiety, obviously you are more likely to then experience periods of low mental well-being than someone who isn't living with those conditions. However, you can still have periods of good mental health where you are able to manage your condition and your life without becoming unwell. So it's really important to know that because you might experience a mental health problem, this doesn't mean you can't live a full and successful life. So whether you have a mental health condition or not, there may be times or situations in your life that are more difficult than others, and the capacity to stay mentally well during those periods is called resilience. Mind's model on how do you build resilience as an individual is based on, one, doing things that support you to have a sense of well-being, that promote a sense of well-being, and then taking action to build your social capital, and then applying psychological coping strategies, and I'll speak about that in a moment, just in a bit more detail. So what I'm going to outline are some of the ways you might be able to develop and strengthen your resilience so that you can deal with everyday life and then also facing difficult situations at work and so on without becoming unwell. But I will say we're all individual, and how we can manage our mental health and how we can have good mental health and how we can manage that on a day-to-day basis is very personal. So it'll be good for you to think through, you know, what does help you and make note of that, and then really build that into how you kind of deal with your day-to-day life. But in terms of, you know, how to promote well-being, we were talking earlier about physical health. There's massive links between your physical health and your mental health. So looking at your sleep, ensuring you've got a good diet, and taking part in physical activity should help you in terms of both physical health and then mental health. And I've heard that within the police, the kind of shifts that you do, quite long hours, it's quite difficult for people to eat. And that obviously will have an impact on your energy levels, which can also then impact on your well-being. So thinking about how you can still make sure you're taking care of yourself and drinking enough and so on. And then doing stuff that you enjoy, so anything in your kind of personal life, you know, cooking, spending time with friends, gardening, just making sure you're maintaining a life outside of work and doing the things that make you feel good is important. And then doing something for others. We know that this idea of giving can also help with your mental health, but obviously if you're working in the police, you already have that feeling of like wanting to serve and support and so on. But also thinking about if there's other voluntary things you can do to help you in your personal time. And then I think, as I was saying before, it's really important to have downtime after your shifts and so on, so you really do de-stress and you can kind of leave work at work. And I think it's also important around well-being is being kind to yourself. I think that, you know, if you're grappling with a problem, we can all be our worst own self-critic, but you would never speak to a friend going through that in the same way. You'd be nothing but supportive. So I think if you are reflecting on things, you know, being kind to yourself can help you with that sense of well-being. And then in terms of building social capital, what we mean by this is just having support networks in your life that you can draw on. So building relationships with the people around you, so colleagues, friends and family and so on, and just nurturing those relationships. So if you are struggling, you feel that there are people, trusted people that you can go to who will understand. And then, you know, really talking about how you're feeling and what you might be struggling with. So you know, feeling comfortable to talk about those issues, but also within the police service, I know a number of them offer employee assistance programs, which are confidential telephone lines that you can call and access, which can help you with a whole host of life issues, but also can act as a gateway to getting some counselling and so on. So looking into those kinds of support services that you could access. And then in terms of psychological coping strategies, I think we all grow up knowing how to kind of take care of our physical health. You know, there's a lot that we learn about eating well, exercise. We don't really have that same education about what we need to do to be mentally well. But we know that meditation and mindfulness and some of these positive thinking kind of approaches can be really beneficial to people, and also talking treatments can also help people in terms of managing poor mental health. So just looking to see how you can introduce some of that into your life could be helpful. So in terms of how do you manage your mental health at work while working within the police service, the fact that you are in quite a high pressurised job, the fact that you are in quite high risk roles, it's really important that you do think about how to manage your mental health at work. You know, you need to feel confident and motivated to perform well in your job. And this means being able to effectively engage with and support your colleagues and undertake your duties. So the following are some suggestions to help you improve your mental health now or at a time when you might find yourself struggling, but it's good to always be thinking about, you know, how to manage your mental health. So as we were talking before, you know, developing and maintaining good relationships with your colleagues, you can build up a network of support to draw on is useful. using the time between home and work to have some downtime and, as I was saying, maintain a life outside of work. And making sure you plan and take your annual leave, that's really important in terms of recharging your battery and having that work-life balance. And another thing we had reflected back from police personnel was just a lot of organisational change happening. And if you are provided with opportunities where you can influence and be part of those decision-making processes, I think you should take every opportunity that's offered to you, because this does impact on your day-to-day operational kind of experience at work. And then reducing the number of work-related emails or calls you may respond to outside of work hours. I know that there's a lot of paperwork and admin that you guys have to deal with, but I think you work quite long shifts and so on, so I think making sure you can draw a line between home and work. I know it's tempting, you kind of think, oh, if I just deal with that email now, I don't have to deal with it tomorrow, or I'm in the thick of it, I can get on the front foot, but it just means you're never really switching off from work. But we can have a chat about how possible you think that is, or if some of these are a bit more challenging to introduce in different operating environments. And then if you are potentially struggling with some work issues, finding a way to voice your frustrations at work may be helpful, but trying to do that in a constructive way and through the proper channels and so on. And then we also had people reflecting back around reorganising your workload and making sure you're not letting things build up so that it becomes like a monumental task in terms of going back over things. So it's just trying to think through what can be a stressor for you. And then also asking for help. If you feel like work is spiralling out of control, take the opportunity to discuss it with your manager or your supervisor. And if you can't resolve the problem, or if it is linked to kind of unrealistic expectations, heavy workloads, talking to colleagues in HR or other relevant members, trade union and so on, so they can help you advocate around those issues. And then I just wanted to talk a moment around if you are experiencing a tough time. I think at that point don't put too much pressure on yourself to try and carry on as normal. We all experience tough times when we just our resilience is depleted for any number of reasons. So it's just thinking through, well, what do I need to do? So you may need to take some time out. That might just be like going for a walk during your lunch hour, but just so you kind of get a moment of perspective. And then saying no to any requests being made of you if you do feel that you really can't kind of meet them. And then, as I was talking before, trying to make sure you get enough sleep and you rest when you can, and be mindful of eating healthily, especially during prolonged shifts. And then learn to accept that you don't have to be perfect and in control at all times. This does happen to everyone. But if you get to that point where you are feeling overwhelmed, I will say that taking action, however small, will help you. You may be able to do some of the things I'm about to suggest, you can just do them of your own accord, but others you might need to negotiate with colleagues or your supervisor and manager. But I think trying to take control by being proactive will really help you. So thinking about what you need at that point. So talking to someone you trust at work or outside about what's having an impact for you or what's making you feel stressed. And speaking up if you need help. As I was saying before, be assertive, say no if you can't take on extra demands. And then also, if you are starting to feel overwhelmed, taking a deep breath, trying to get away from the situation for a few minutes. As I was saying before, exercise and daylight are good for your mental health as well as your physical health. And then making sure you're drinking enough during the day and so on. And then a great antidote to stress is obviously relaxation techniques. So on the Mind website, we have a guide about how to manage stress, which explains a few techniques you can use within the workplace to help you kind of build in a bit of relaxation time. And I will say that there is a range of support available for anyone wanting to talk to someone about their mental well-being or about any concerns that you may have, whether that's about work issues, relationships, health, money or other issues. So obviously speaking to someone in your workplace first and foremost will be helpful, but only if they are really aware of and informed about mental health and its interaction with work, and then how they can maybe offer support measures or workplace adjustments to help you. So a large part of what the Blue Light programme is trying to achieve is ensuring that police services, promote a more open culture around mental health and create that kind of positive dialogue so people feel able to seek support earlier. So you and your colleagues can get the right support at the right time. But then outside of work, there are also many sources of support available which personnel may find helpful, such as speaking to your GP or calling the Mind Blue Light info line, which can give you a whole host of information about mental health conditions, but then also what support's available in your local area. And details of all of this will be given at the end of this webinar. Taking part in our webinar and here to share their experiences of working in the police service are Ed Simpson and Dave Stringer. Firstly, we're going to hear from Ed about his experience of working in the service and his experience of mental health. So over to you, Ed.
Hi. I'm here today to talk about my own experience of suffering a mental health problem whilst being a police officer. I've been a police officer for 15 years now. Prior to that I was a special for 5 years. So
Okay.
wearing the uniform, it's been about 20 years now for me. Absolutely loved the job. It was fantastic, all I ever wanted to do. But in around 2008, I'd got about 8 years experience as a PC. And I've been doing family liaison officer work, so dealing with families who'd suffered bereavements through murder or manslaughter or maybe a road traffic collision. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that interaction with people and trying to help people through what is like a really disastrous time for them. You know, the whole world's ended. But it was around 2008 and I dealt with a job which was fairly straightforward. I'd dealt with it before, and it was taking a family who'd lost their son in a car accident. He'd been killed in a car accident. And I thought nothing of it. I've done this before. It's not a pleasant thing to do, but hey, done it before. And I took them in there, and the mother saw her son and she screamed. And that was the start of my mental health problems from there. I don't know why. All I can put it down to is at that time I was maybe a little bit more vulnerable because I'd become a father myself about 6 months earlier.
Right.
So maybe I wasn't as resilient as I always was.
And you identified with that feeling of grief.
Yeah. And identified, and what happens if that were my daughter? You know, and I felt that pain. And that shield you have as a cop, that you're there to protect yourself when you're dealing with all these really bad things, it just completely disintegrated. And it was the first time ever in my service I'd cried on the job.
Wow.
And I cried there and then in the room with the family. I cried outside the room with the family. I got in the car and cried, and I just completely lost it.
Just stayed with you.
I couldn't shake it off. But I put it down to, and I thought to myself, no, it's just that I'm now a dad and a cop, whereas before I was just a cop. And now I'm a father and a cop.
Right.
So I need to learn how to be a dad and a cop. But sadly, it had left a seed inside me that grew and grew and grew, and I didn't realise. So over the years, I found that maybe looking back now, my resilience didn't recover, and I was dealing with jobs that before were very straightforward, but now I was finding them really upsetting. Sudden deaths, anything at all that had any kind of emotion was really kind of it was unusually just really impacted on me, and I tried to ignore it and tried to just keep going through. But 4 years later I found myself, I'd become promoted, and I was working in a custody area in York, and dealing with people, as many people will know, dealing with people who come in with mental health problems and suffering mental health distress, and dealing with people who are suffering all kinds of personal problems in life. And I found that was really the grind. It ground me down. That really did amplify my mental health problems. I've got to say that all through this I had no idea there was anything wrong with me. So I'm not sat there going, oh yeah, I must go get some help. I just thought I was completely normal. What I was feeling was normal, but I was not very good at dealing with it.
Right.
But I find that is what it's very, having a mental health problem can be very distorting.
Right.
And it can make you believe something that isn't happening is, you know, so it make you believe that what's happening is normal, and so you don't think anything of it, but you still struggle with it.
Okay.
And I was in custody, and slowly over the months in custody, I couldn't shake anything off. I was dealing with people who would come in saying they were going to kill themselves, and I'd be releasing them from custody, and then I'd be carrying that and thinking if they kill themselves, it'll be my fault. I didn't do enough for them. I was finding that I was trying to be perfect, and it's not possible.
No.
Especially in custody, because you can't save everybody's, you know, you can't fix everybody's life.
And people have very complex lives.
Very complex lives, and you only have them for a short amount of time. But it became very grinding down for me. I started doing some strange things to try and cope, looking back now. And I remember having to segment my shift into blocks. So literally it started off as get through this hour, and then it got to half an hour, and at the peak it got to 15 minutes. And working a 12-hour shift, that's 48 blocks.
Just trying to get through each bit.
Trying to get through. I remember looking at the clock on the wall. I can still see the clock on the custody wall now, and watching that clock, and that was my life. That was the 15-minute block. and I'd go home after a shift and undoubtedly self-medicate with drink to survive, and then I'd go back and do it again. And it was just, looking back now, it was just a descent, a rather fast descent.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to keep going. I thought I have to be strong. I can't leave my colleagues to look after all this. You know, I need to be the person that does all this. No one else can do it. And so I put far too much pressure on myself. And one day, it was the 16th of June, which is tomorrow actually, so 3 years tomorrow when it happened. I went into work as normal. It was a Saturday morning. The custody area was absolutely packed, full to the brim, and I could not engage with what was going on. I could not, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember how to log on the computer. I didn't feel connected with anything, and suddenly I just felt like, I think I described it as a boiling kettle. If you imagine I've been boiling away like a boiling kettle for 7 months. This is how long it had taken, 7 months, every day, and just not living a life, having no relationship with my family, my children, anything like that, just totally engulfed in this slow breakdown. And then suddenly I went from feeling everything to feeling nothing. And it was actually a relief, but I see it as my body had said, enough's enough, and it just blew the fuse. And I felt nothing, and it was a great feeling because it was respite from what had happened and what I'd been going through for such a long time. But it's not a great thing either, because suddenly I didn't care about anything. I'd gone from a very caring person to someone who now didn't care about anything, and that includes my kids and my wife and my family and myself. And that was a difficult thing to deal with, but it had to happen. I'd gone to that point where I'd not felt I could go anywhere to get help, and I just kept going until the fuse blew. And for the first time in my career, then I went off sick, which again was another big thing for me because I'd never had a day off sick, and suddenly I'm off. And I suppose from that point it was even a further decline really, because then I'd lost what I loved doing, and I didn't have that anymore. So you start to feel worthless, and you start to feel like you're not worth anything. And the longer you're off, that worse that gets.
And how did your force kind of engage with you or keep you engaged while you were off sick, or what happened there?
I had many colleagues in the force who kept in touch with me.
Right, so just
and
general
would come and
checking
see
in.
me.
That's
yeah,
good.
would come and see me, check in with me. It was very difficult for them, obviously very difficult, because I was someone who was very happy, smiley, help anybody, and suddenly I'm not the same person. I'd lost something, lost that. Someone described it as I'd lost the spark. I'd lost that little twinkle in my eye because I'm very, happy. I'd lost it, and they could see I'd lost it, and that's how it felt. So it took a long time for me to recover. I was off for an entire year.
Oh.
And when I came back to work, I thought I'd be the only person in the police service who'd ever been off with depression, because that's what I was off with, post-traumatic stress and depression. And I thought I would be the only person, and I was so wrong. I went back to work. I had two choices. When people say, "Where have you been?" do I say, "Well, I had an injury and I've just been recovering, now I'm back"? Or do I be honest? And I decided that the best thing to be was honest. But I'd lost everything. I had nothing to lose. So I was in a position where I thought, actually, I'll just be honest. And it's the best thing I ever did, because I've not spoken to one person at work, told them what's happened, and they haven't had a reaction of either saying, well, yes, I've had depression too, or yes, I'm on tablets for depression too, or my wife's got depression, my husband's got depression, I've got a brother who's got depression. It's just everybody seems to know someone who's had a struggle with mental.
Once you say, then opens it up for other people to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was kind of comforting to know that I wasn't the only person to go through it. And then I started realising that actually it shouldn't be a shock to find that people within the police service are going to suffer from mental health problems. We're not robots. No. We're human beings, and we have our plus sides and our negative sides, and we all deal with things differently. And in life, your life can throw different things at you. Like for me, probably having a child brought my resilience down. And then I went to a job that was particularly harrowing. And it just threw me out of orbit a little bit, spun me a little bit, and I wasn't able to recover. And sadly, it got to the bit where I went off the end of the cliff kind of thing, and I've had to crawl back up. But I saw it as a massive opportunity when I came back, when I started speaking to people and seeing how it's just a part of what people are in the service. Many people are suffering from stress, but stress, we all suffer from stress, but it's not allowing that stress to eat away at you and develop into something that's not, you can't cope with, because that's literally what happened to me. It just went beyond stress and it became kind of a spiral. You know, one thing led to another, led to another, led to another.
Well, that's the thing, mental health does exist on a spectrum, and you know,
Yeah.
you can have pressure at work and then unending pressure becomes that feeling of stress,
Yeah.
and then stress, if that's not dealt with, can become anxiety or depression, and you move along it.
Absolutely,
You know.
yeah. And so now, I mean, one of the big things I do now, I'm very open about it at work, and many people know at work what's happened to me, and I feel the change is happening within the service. I feel the time's right and the appetite's there, and people are more open about it and willing to talk about it. There's a long way to go yet, but at the moment I give talks to the new recruits who come through, and I'll just sit them down at the end of a day when they're all about to go home, and I'll just talk to them for 15 minutes. Doesn't take much. I'll talk to them 15 minutes and say, look, I'm here. I've been a cop 15 years. I'm a sergeant now, but I've had depression since 2012. And it's quite interesting to see the reactions on their faces. You see them nodding, you see them sitting back a little bit, but by the end of that 15 minutes, I think hopefully they've taken it on board that, remember, you might have a baton and cuffs and body armour, but you're not invincible, physically or mentally, and you just need to be kind to yourself and realise you're doing a difficult job, and make sure you talk to each other, and look out for each other as well. Because you might see someone struggling a little bit, go ask them if they're all right.
Yep.
That's how I first came out about what happened. And my supervisor said that on that 16th of June, because I looked completely vacant, and she said to me, are you all right? You look terrible. And I just said, I'm not. And that was the start, really, of the recovery for me.
And what was her response when you said, no, I'm not?
Strangely enough, she'd had her own experience in the family of someone with a mental health problem.
So she could show empathy.
Yeah, she'd had it. Just like I said, I rarely meet somebody who hasn't got a clue, or not experienced it, or been involved with it in some way, shape or another.
Yeah.
So it's definitely there. We can't ignore it. And I think I look back and think of the horrendous time I've had. And I look back now and just think it was absolutely horrendous. And I'm laughing because I'm pleased it's over. Because I remember at the time thinking, this is my life for the rest of my life. This is it. This is my life now. And to feel that it actually isn't my life at all. I was ill, very ill. It's a relief. And I look back and I always think to myself, thank God for that, you know. But I'd hate for anyone to go through it. And there is things you can do just to prevent that from hopefully happening to you just by talking. So I'm hoping to get a dialogue going between people at work, and just, because sometimes all you need to do is talk about what you've experienced and just process it. And hopefully, you know, it won't have such a damaging effect on you.
Yeah.
Because keeping it to yourself is the worst thing you can do, really.
Well, I wanted to ask you a quick question about, you know, debriefs and so on. So I think then when there are major incidents or critical incidents, there's a lot of wraparound support to help people manage that. So like, you know, bombings and so on.
Yeah.
But I think there is also the fact that there can just be very situations that are just triggering for you personally, but it would be helpful to kind of debrief with someone about you know, what happened, why it had an impact on you, or what stayed with you is whether or not you dealt with it appropriately, so you can then talk about that, reflect on what you could have done differently, and then just put it to bed, so to speak, and move on. So do you feel like there's a culture of that happens? Because that's kind of a hard hat. You know, building sites have their hard hats to help them, you know, safeguard against physical injury. But if you're in a high risk role, dealing with people, dealing with complex situations, what do you think about a culture of debriefs to help you kind of manage the impact of that?
I think it depends how you define a high risk role.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would say that for any role I can think of in the police service can be really stressful and can carry risk. And I think we're I've been in the job now 22 years, and it's just incredibly different in a really positive, good way. And you will be asked routinely, in my experience, if something really significant has happened, are you okay? do you need extra support? So for an incident, for a one-off event, I think we're actually really good now.
Yeah.
My experience is not many people take that up, even though you offer it to them.
Okay.
Because actually there's that team spirit, and everyone's been through it together. They'll talk about it quite naturally, and generally people will pick up, I think, on it's...
People rally round.
Yes, it's that longer term, that sort of drip, drip, drip of
The daily
where
grind.
the family, as Ed's described, where your changes in your change in life circumstances interacts with the drip, drip, drip of all the things we do in the service and all the pressures and all the stresses. It's and I think we are getting there, and there is help and support there, but it's just having that routine. You know, I every single person that I line manage, every few weeks or so, we sit down quite formally, and welfare is one of the things that we talk about.
That's really positive.
And most of the time, I'm fine, boss, yeah, no issues. But actually, you then sort of allow people to open up. And certainly since my experience, I've found that being open about sort of my family issues, people are much more open and much more willing to talk to me about what's happened to them, because it becomes acceptable.
Yeah, you normalise it, and also you lead by example by being open. Because we are going to talk about your experiences in a moment. But I just wanted to maybe get your views on something else, because it's really positive that you have kind of monthly catch-ups, or frequent catch-ups where you have a kind of general check-in. How are things going? Because that normalises talking about mental health, so it doesn't feel jarring if you ever need to broach a conversation with someone. But it also, as you say, creates the space for people to go, no, I'm not okay at this point in time. But I just wanted your views on a tool that Mind has adapted for use within the workplace. So if someone's living with a mental health problem, they would develop with their health professional a kind of action plan about how to support themselves to have good mental health, and then it would identify triggers that might cause them to experience poor mental health again. And then some early warning signs that they're struggling, and then steps for them to take and steps for the health professional. And that framework, I think, is really useful, and we've kind of produced a resource and guide to how you can develop this with your line manager. So it's a very individual plan for you about how, what does this look like for me? What do I need to do to have good mental health at work? What might be a trigger for me? And that's when you could get into those things that are actually attending a call out that involves a young child because I'm a new dad, or something, just things that might resonate with you because of your personal situation and experiences would kind of capture that. So then it's kind of saying, well, this is a major incident for me, even if it wouldn't be to anyone else, but it is for me. So what do you think? Could that be something possible, or?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the way I would look at it is, we know the job is stressful.
Yes.
We know, and custody sergeant is incredibly stressful. We know that. Actually, I think it's something that, in the same way that we always ask people about career progression, about how we can develop them, I think an action plan, I'm not sure is that helpful, because I think it suggests to me, actually, there's something wrong you need to put right. Whether you call it sort of personal resilience or something, because actually we're all going to experience stress. It's part of the job.
I think it's for you guys to think what would embed well.
How we routinely build resilience, because at some stage something is going to happen to us, to all of us, when we're going to need extra support.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really interesting. I mean, I will say that the guide that we've produced around that is available on our website, so people can have a look at that. I know Kent Police have rolled something out similar, so again, we're hoping to share best practice across services. But I just wanted to say thanks, Ed, so much for sharing what you went through and what you've learned from it. That's really, I just think that for this, the Blue Light programme, it's so important to have people live, with lived experience of a mental health problem working within the service, to kind of share what they've learned and how they've come through the other side. So thank you for that. We're now going to hear from Dave Stringer, who's Chief Superintendent within the Community Engagement Team at the Met, about your personal story and how then that's affected, you in the workplace and so on. So over to you. Okay,
thank you. My story is different from Ed's, in that sort of my story revolves around supporting my daughter.
Okay.
She was lucky enough at 17, very young, to meet a wonderful man who was a para. They got married, she was only 18. They decided that they would try for a child, which at that stage we were thinking, well, he's just about to be posted to Afghanistan. Is that really such a really, a good move? In hindsight, thank goodness they did, because sadly he was killed. That was 4 years ago now. So difficult for all the family, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And then the first year, I think she was absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. So difficult for us as her family, although there's mental illness in our family. So my father-in-law was bipolar.
Okay.
So for us, it's sort of she was doing exceptionally well, really, really strong, coping with everything, coping with being a mum, coping with sort of the things you have to do, particularly at sort of service funerals. You know, being very public at being a war widow at the age of 20. So having to deal with one of the worst things that life has to throw at you at such a young age. Sadly, Daniel had died 2 weeks after she gave birth. So difficult enough anyway, difficult enough to have a baby, difficult enough to have a bereavement. And then all for that to be wrapped up together all in one thing, really, really challenging. But so the first year, I think she coped amazingly well. And it's difficult as a family to sort of say, well, actually, none of us have been bereaved at that age. None of us have that personal experience. Well, what can you expect, and what's above that you need to be really, really concerned about? So we're concerned, but I suppose it was probably took about a year, I suppose, for us to think, well, actually, there is probably something underlying that, and it probably wasn't necessarily the sort of the being really down, which is what you'd really expect for somebody in that stage of her life, but probably the sort of the more manic episodes, and it was that, I suppose, that we were able to identify because of our experience of her granddad, that actually we thought, right, she needs more help and support. Over that time, I have to say, from a blue light service, looking at how the army do the sort of equivalent of what Ed was doing around sort of family liaison, the army are absolutely fantastic, brilliant, and I think we've got a lot to learn from them. Not just in terms of how well they deal with things, but how long they deal with families. So for them, it's the regiment's a really long, it's got a really long history, and so for them, dealing with Emily and dealing with Logan will be one of their responsibilities
throughout their lives.
Throughout their lives, which is really, really good. And sort of, I suppose, the next couple of years were really, really difficult. Supporting Emily, trying to look after her as best we could. At the same time, I was a barrack commander at the time, really difficult, challenging day job. And in some ways, it made things easier, because in terms of how you manage stress and how you manage pressure, to a degree, I've got all this personal stuff that's really difficult and challenging, that I have no control over, really. And then I come into work and it's pretty regimented and everything happens and I know exactly what's going on, and although it can be demanding and stressful and what have you, pretty much I can control my destiny there. And there isn't the same emotional attachment that
You just go in and get the job done.
Exactly. So to a degree, that was really helpful. And I have to say, people at work, absolutely fantastic. So for example, friends around me, they did some charity events for Logan. Not that having, he's got 2 sets of grandparents, so he doesn't want for anything. But it's just the thought and just them showing that they were there for us. So absolutely fantastic. And I suppose, from a really, really negative, challenging thing, it gave me an awful lot more insight into what it actually is like to live with a mental health condition, and to recognise that in other people, really. And since that time, I think people open up to me a lot more, because, like Ed, I don't hide what's happened to me, what's happened to the family. Lots of people know it, and in some ways, actually, you're somebody that people can go to, or people that that people can feel able that they can talk to you about really difficult things that perhaps they might struggle to, but they know that even if you haven't been through exactly that thing, you've got some idea, and that you're happy to talk openly about your situation, and I think that's been really, really helpful. I think you can actually recognise in others, right, I know what you're like normally, for want of a better word, and I can see you're not the same, but it's perhaps having that confidence to sit somebody down and say, you're not the same, we need to have a conversation, because I think the temptation is, that's why I was quite interested to hear what your line manager actually said, Ed, and I wonder if perhaps she'd have said to you, are you okay? You'd have said, yeah, fine. But she didn't, did she? Are you okay? You don't look. And that then, I think, that
opens it up a bit more.
Opens it up a bit more and allows you to have to sort of start having that sort of proper conversation. But again, listening to how Ed's used his experience, that's very similar to sort of. It has been really difficult for us as a family and for my daughter particularly, but she sort of moved on in her life. Obviously, things will never be the same, but she's been exceptionally lucky, and she's got a new partner and she's got a new baby, and from I think where she was 3 years ago, where there was no happy ending, not that's the wrong words, but no way that she could see any kind of future. She can now see a future, and perhaps it's not the future she would have ever thought about 5 years ago, but at least she's got a future now, and I think that's such a powerful thing for people.
No, absolutely. I think it's always difficult when you go through dark times. You think that it's not going to get better, and then obviously for you as well, you never thought that you would go back to feeling how you were before, but there is that idea of just saying to people, you can go through a difficult side and come out the other side. Absolutely. It's just about making sure you get the kind of timely support when it's needed, and that continues as long as you might need it, or you learn tools and techniques to help you manage.
And also I think that very strong sense of limits as well that Ed was talking about. So, she now knows where her limits are. I've got much better idea where her limits are, but also where mine are, and how I can help myself support her well. And that's partly about me looking after myself as well. But still now, I still almost cannot believe how strong she was at that time as well.
But people deal with it in different ways. Some people just go into overdrive, let's plan the funeral, let's get through this, and then it can hit them so much further down the line. And then after that, everyone seems to think, well, they're doing okay. And then it's then drawing that spot. I mean, people are so different in how they manage difficult situations. But I think it's really positive that
I think
the point
rather
which
than
you did,
just think about people as I think perhaps used to happen in the past. Somebody has a mental illness, therefore they will always struggle to cope. Because actually, the truth is far more complicated, isn't it? And actually, in some ways, in some areas, they perhaps become more resilient.
I think you absolutely do, because you have more awareness of, as you said, your limits.
Yes.
I think if you have gone through a difficult period, you understand more about when you are beginning to go into that, into a time when you might be starting to struggle, and you can think, right, what do I need to do to offset that, to mitigate, to minimise, to push myself around this way? And I think that's a real strength to actually understand that, because that's what I was trying to make the point earlier, that we don't grow up knowing what we need to do to be mentally well. We don't have that same understanding. It's only when things happen to you that you start thinking, well, this is something I need to attend to, this is something I need to manage just as much as my eating and so on. So thank you, that was really useful. Was there anything you wanted to add around what that's then meant in terms of the Met Police and what you're doing to kind of support colleagues and so on?
I think, as I say, I think the service as a whole completely different to how it was 20 years ago when I joined. But I think we can still improve, and I think the more people who talk openly about mental illness, particularly from a family context, so I think we all understand that it's something that happens to all of us, and it's something that we will all have at some stage, I've no doubt, to have some involvement with. I just think it makes us more inclusive. I think we deal with mental illness better, and I think it gives us a better opportunity to support each other as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, both of you. I think that's what's really going to help the Blue Light programme, because as you say, people can have views about, well, what does mental health look like? What does a mental health problem look like? What does this mean for me? What does it look like? So having more and more people talk about their personal experience kind of gets behind potentially stereotypes that people might have, or views that people might have, because it can look very different. But the principles of how you support someone is the same. I think it's, saying to someone, are you okay? And when they say no, exploring, well, what does that mean in terms of your ability to do your job? What does it mean in terms of the work maybe having an impact on your job? What can we put in place? So that's really important, I think, about just kind of building those conversations in. So as I said, thank you both for taking part in this webinar and sharing your experiences. It's really important to kind of get people working in the police service to talk about their experiences and kind of normalise these issues. So thank you again. So we hope that you have found viewing this webinar helpful. We have produced additional webinars in the series entitled Mental Health Awareness and Managing Mental Health in the Workplace. The first one just talks about some of the more common mental health conditions. What does it look like to be living with one of these, and then what treatment and support is available. And the one around managing mental health at work talks about what your employer and line managers should be doing to support people to have good mental health at work. Please take a few moments at the end of this webinar to give us your feedback. There'll be a short survey coming up soon. It's really important for us to get your feedback so we can ensure the programme meets your needs. And we've also created a whole host of resources and information booklets that cover these topics in more detail for blue light personnel. These are available to you and your colleagues, so please share the guidance as it may be of help to someone. At the end of the webinar, there'll be details of all these different information, resources and support available, so please take the time to look at that. We are determined to reach as many emergency services personnel as possible, so please do make your colleagues aware of the Blue Light programme as a whole, but then also the services and support available within it, and then of course making them aware of these webinars. So thanks again, Ed and Dave, and thanks for watching.